I'm simply going to try to rehearse what I think I heard, which I'm glad to say actually squares pretty nicely with what the other two observers heard. So it seems to me that we come together with some hope that, as somebody said, we could rein in the technology. There was talk at tables about limits, about boundaries, about drawing lines. For example, somebody at one of our tables said that she would like to know how to be able to say yes, on the one hand, to technologies aimed at helping transgendered people get on with their lives as they want to, on the one hand, but say no to transhumanism on the other. Those were the kinds of hopes for lines that were articulated, though I think nobody believes there's any kind of silver bullet, to use Sheila's phrase, on offer. So what are the concerns that I heard that motivated that kind of hope? As we've already heard, certainly one of those concerns was about markets, or as many people said quite clearly, greed. The concern was that greed and desire are increasingly dominating our lives, and that in fact no sphere of our lives is any longer free from them. That was a concern articulated by many, as has already been mentioned, however. Some of the Gen Xers said, look, that's just the way our lives are. We sell ourselves, we market ourselves all the time. Selling eggs is just an extension of that. A second thread or source of concern, I think, regarded coercion and exploitation. More specifically, there was the concern that the reprogenetic market exploits women and people of color in particular. There was concern about soft coercion of women. There was the suggestion that when people avail themselves of these technologies, they're suffering from what we used to call false consciousness, a form of ignorance, ambivalence, or obfuscation. On the other hand, that is, it was reported yesterday that some people said, well, we once upon a time thought that IVF would expand women's choices, and now we worry that, in fact, it has constrained them. That's what we Altacockers said. Then the Gen Xers said, you know, we don't buy these false consciousness arguments. We're as much in control of our lives as any human beings ever have been. That argument about false consciousness or the deficit model just isn't resonating with us. The third concern that motivated that ultimate hope about drawing lines and reining in had to do with technology, the nature of technology. As Bruce said, power uses us. As many people said, the technology is not morally neutral. It is shaping us all the time in ways we need to become more aware of. Again, the Gen Xers had a very different take, or at least some of them did. I too was very struck by Joe's comments. Yes, maybe there's reason to worry about these technologies being foisted upon women. There's an argument to be made for that. But hey, we in the disability community, we want access to those technologies. And when we get access to them, we want to make some distinctions, like between selecting for homozygotes and heterozygotes. Similarly, Sujata reminded us of the ways in which technology can be used to, as she said, I think, deconstruct or construct. That is, the technology can shore up traditional families, and it can be used to create new, very untraditional families. The technology can reinforce our interest in our biological ancestors and all of the garbage that goes along with that, and it can problematize our understanding of ourselves as examples of anything pure at all. So the point is that Sujata was making, I thought, was that these technologies can indeed reinforce very old, dumb ideas about race, and they can also be used to disrupt those very same ideas. So from concerns to a different topic, the question, who are we? A number of issues were raised around that. They've already been mentioned. As Deborah from the beginning said, this is a highly diverse group. There was the worry about strange bedfellows. A longer conversation. I mean, why is it that that traditional political categories don't well capture who's in this room and who isn't? Another concern or an issue concerning who we are regarded this question about academics versus advocates, and there was this concern about how we can, as Adrian said, articulate symbolic concerns about markets and so forth without being labeled as religious or conservative or without giving ammunition to our enemies in the abortion war. Again, those are the concerns of people who think that those symbolic concerns warrant traction. As for solutions to these concerns or responses to them, there were at least three terms that jumped out at me. There was this exhortation that we promote awareness of the questions. There was the recommendation that we try to achieve balance. As Jonathan said, we aren't getting rid of markets or science. The question is, how can we balance better markets and civil society? As Sheila said yesterday, you know, we have university-industrial relations and balance. Why can't we have university-civil society relations too? There was the final term that was offered was regulation, perhaps within a health and human rights framework. Indeed, I think that's where most liberals tend to end up on these kinds of questions. Regulation probably isn't going to produce the kinds of limits and boundaries that some of us might sometimes hope for, but at the end of the day, it seems to be the sort of thing that many of the people in this room are going to settle for. A final observation I would make, in my own voice, there was a lot of concern about genocentrism and geneticization and about the importance of viewing the big picture. And I think we have to remember that we are at a very important, new, and actually exciting scientific moment where the people who once upon a time were gene-centric, even they have accepted that that is an inadequate scientific model. If you want to understand complex human traits, you have to study genes in context. So in a way, we have to be careful to avoid speaking in policy terms which reflect an old-fashioned genetic view of the world, when in fact, the science itself is far more holistic, far more interested in the way that genes interact with environmental variables. I'm out of time. Thank you.